So, in this video, we're going to now talk about this right strip right here, right? This vertical strip that's on the right side of the map of the museum. Basically, we're going to go over all the block piles within this regime, right? Everything along this vertical strip. Now, basically, if you recall, as a leaper hunter, right, we come from this direction, right? We come from this tunnel that comes after hider spawn, right? We came from hider spawn, right? We head in this direction, we're checking for hiders, right? We go over here, right? We go over here, check the TNTs. But then when we come over here, we have two important spots to check, which aren't block piles, right? Right? We have to check above this white tent of wool, right? There's a hider up there, we just launch our bow to kill them, right? Right, basically just like that. More specifically, where they'd be located is right here, right? You can find all sorts of blocks right here. Usually flower pots, though, right? Usually flower pots. Right, and the other spot we check, right, not only the tent, but we also check up there. Right, you want to really make sure that there's no blocks up there. So if you were to visually go up there, right, then basically it looks like this, right? Again, usually it's flower pots that are up here. You can sometimes see hiders on top of the leaves as well. So this will sometimes happen, like flower pots up there. Alright, but that's basically the idea. Right, but notice there's another thing that's over here, right? The TNT stack. Right? TNT stack, basically, it's basically a staircase, as you can see, a staircase of 3 blocks. Right, where we have a TNT in front of the stack and a TNT behind the stack. That's really how you can memorize, right? It's basically a staircase, 1 T in front of the stack, and 1 TNT behind the stack. Just like that. And so, really, right, some common spots you might see, like if you have 2 TNTs in a row in front of the stack like this, 2 TNTs on top of each other, right? Or if you see 2 TNTs on top of the stack like this, right? This is typically what you will see if you do see a fake block there, right? Now, really, notice how as we go down this vertical strip, there's this common pattern in blocks we see. It's not really a pattern, but notice we have a bunch of anvils surrounding these pillars right here, right? Now, these anvils, you don't really have to memorize them. In fact, I don't even know the exact structure of all of them, right? Because really, you almost never see hiders go here, right? It's not super common, right? And so, really, I tend to check them with radar, right, most of the time. And so what's important to be familiar with this vertical strip is usually, right, you can just check it with Radar Hunter, right? The purpose of this video is to just basically give you an overview of some of the spots you might see when you're a Radar Hunter and you find them, right? And I mean, as you play the game more, you could eventually know all the spots, like without Radar Hunter, but with Leaper Hunter, you'd be perfectly fine doing that. Right, but anyways, the purpose of this, for this video, is for Radar Hunter purposes. Alright, so now let's talk about the pillars with the anvils, right, specifically the anvils. So as for the anvils, right, notice how when you morph as an anvil, they're only going to be facing one direction, and that is along this direction. Right, they aren't going to be facing the same direction as these anvils, right? And since the orientation correction usually never really works, right, you typically aren't going to see it corrected, right? Sometimes it is, but most of the time it's not, right? So it's not something you really have to worry about, right? Radar, again, will help you along the way. But as for this direction, right, notice how the anvils do, in fact, they face the same direction. As for anvils along this direction, you should never see 2 anvils in a row. Right? In this case, there's 0 on this side, right? There's 0 over here. Right? But what I mean by that is you should never see something like this. You should never see 2 anvils in a row on this side, right? In this direction. Right? There is going to be 2 anvils in a row for this direction, right? So if you ever see 3 anvils in a row, like this, right, that has to be fake. Right? But 2 anvils in a row on this side is always going to be fake. Right, there are some cases where you could have a single anvil there, but again, radar could help you with that. Like, for instance, you could have 1 anvil right here, and it would be fake. But again, radar could help you. And so that's basically it for the pillars with the anvils. Notice how the only pillar on this side that doesn't have anvils, I don't know why I'm calling them pillars, I don't even know if that's what they're called. I just kind of naturally refer to them that way. But the only pillar on this side of the map that doesn't have anvils with them is over here, right, with the cauldrons, right? The cauldrons, in fact, it actually comes in the center about, because, right, this is approximately center aligned with the center of the map, right? The cauldrons are about in the center. Right? Again, you can't hide on top of a cauldron, right? But you can sometimes find hiders inside the cauldron. For instance, you'll sometimes see hiders hiding as chickens, right? I can't morph into a chicken, obviously, but you'll sometimes find hiders hiding as chickens here, right? Again, flower pots inside of cauldrons, that happens too. Just some things to be aware of, right? You should never see a cauldron on the very edge of the stack, like right here or right here, right? That would be considered fake. Right, and the other thing that you should not see is you should not see two cauldrons in a row right here, right? It just shouldn't happen. Right, and that's basically the idea of that. So that basically goes over all the pillars over here, right? The anvils, the cauldron, that goes over every single one of these. Now let's just focus on the block piles on the border over here, right? That's really all we gotta focus on now. Right, we've already gone over the TNT stack, so let's focus on this bookshelf stack, right? This bookshelf stack is right next to this tunnel leading to the inside of this narrow tunnel that we talked about. So as for the bookshelf stack, right, again, it might look super bad, but it's actually not, right? Because really, you can break it up in parts, right? You have a staircase of 3 bookshelves in the back, right? A staircase of 2 bookshelves in the front, so basically 3 and 2. Right, and then you have a bookshelf that goes really high up, right, 4 blocks high, right, and a bookshelf in front of the stack, right. If this staircase is ever interrupted, for instance, like this, as you can see, a square of bookshelves, again, a square of bookshelves, right. Notice how it's squared off like this. Then it has to be fake. Like in this case, it's sort of cubed off, but again, you can still think of it like you see a square there, has to be fake. Right, whenever you see a square, as we've been seeing in the past, right, squares usually are a sign that we are dealing with a fake block. Right? Another common spot you might see, not super common, but like if you see 2 bookshelves on top of the stack, it's fake. Right? Or a bookshelf that goes way too high up like this. That would also be fake. I guess if you see 2 bookshelves on top of each other, or if you see 2 bookshelves in a row. So something like that would be an indication that you have a fake block. Right? So that's basically the idea. Alright, going over here, we actually have some really interesting block piles over here. And it really is actually interesting. The melon stack and the cauldron stack. Because there are some really interesting patterns you can pick up from this. Because it's almost symmetrical. It's almost symmetrical with respect to this direction. Because notice, right, we have a melon, a melon, a melon, cauldron, cauldron, cauldron. It's symmetrical about this direction, right? Notice the 3 melons over here and the 3 cauldrons over here. That makes it symmetrical. The other thing is that, if you recall, look at what this structure is that I'm showing you right here. This structure that I'm showing you. This is the same exact structure that we saw before, right? Back in this area over here, right? With the hay bales. It's the same exact structure. The hay bales, the TNTs, the melons over there. It's that same exact structure repeating itself, right? That same thing is happening in this melon stack right here, as we can see. But that same exact structure also occurs in the cauldron stack. It's just mirrored, right? It's flipped around. So we see, right, it occurs in the melon stack and the cauldron stack, but also it's symmetrical, right? It's right there and right there, but it's also symmetrical with it. So really what I want you to notice, right, neglect this melon for a second. Just going from here to here, both the melon stack and cauldron stack are symmetrical to each other. If you neglect this melon, and this cauldron, they're symmetrical. Right? Basically, I hope you can visually see that, right? So it gives you a really good idea, right? For instance, if you see 3 cauldrons in a row, it's fake. Or if you see this structure right here, right? If you see this structure right here disrupted, like for instance, 2 cauldrons in a row like this, right? Or if you see a staircase of cauldrons like this, it has to be fake. Right? Same thing with the melon stack, right? 3 melons in a row. Right? In this case, you could see 2 melons on top of each other like this. Right? Or if you see 2 melons in a row right here, again, that common structure is being disrupted. Right? 2 melons on top of each other. Again, the structure is being disrupted. Or a melon that goes way too high up. These are the spots I typically see whenever I find a hider over here. So that's what makes this area actually really interesting to look at. Right? It's very interesting. Right? Wonder if they came up with that on purpose. It always makes me wonder if they strategically designed it that way. So we've talked about this. Now we keep going along the border. Right? We have these 3 flower pots. I tend to actually look at these 3 flower pots as I'm kind of moving around, still as a leaper hunter. Right? Because literally, again, as a leaper hunter, right, if you recall from the route, we come from this direction, right? We look up here, we look up there, and we just head in this direction. We can look at each of these block piles, and it's really easy to determine if there's a fake hider, right? Since now that we know about these block piles, it makes it really easy. Especially since we only have 3 flower pots here, it makes it really easy to determine if there's a fake one or not. Right? Many times you'll find a fake flower pot, right? And really, since there's only 3, it makes it really easy to tell if there's a fake one. For instance, right here, the flower pots are too close. Here, the flower pots are too close. Again, they're too close to each other. And if you see something like this, notice how it's basically, right, both pairs of flower pots are diagonally aligned, right? That's another indication of a fake flower pot. Or I guess if you see a diamond of flower pots, right? Just like that, right? That's basically it for the flower pots. Continuing this way, we have the furnaces that we talked about in, I think, the previous 2 videos, right? We talked about this when we went over the narrow tunnel over here that comes before hider spawn. But again, if you see a squared off furnace stack, right, or I think the spot I mentioned was that you have a furnace right here, right? Or if you have 2 furnaces in a row right here. Right, that's basically the idea of how you determine a fake furnace there. Right, and that's basically the idea. So next we're going to move on to the hay bales. Right, so the game just started. So now you can really see here that in this area with the hay bales, there should be a total of 3 sheep. Right? As the game goes on, right, they will tend to roam around a lot. Like, they can roam literally all the way over to here. Right, they can roam around, like, lots of places. Right, but usually it's able to still be counted, right? 3 total sheep is how much you should see. You should see 3 sheep here, right? If you see more than that, it's fake. So as for the hay bales, really, the way that I first thought about these was I thought about the ones that could be real and the ones that couldn't be real, right? Whenever you morph into a hay bale, they're always going to be oriented upward, right? Vertically, right? Not on its side like this one. Right? That's what you get when you morph into a hay bale. So, really, what that means is that, of course, these 3 hay bales, well, these 2 hay bales are real, right? But the only 4 hay bales that you really need to know about in this stack are this one, this one, this one, and this one. Because this one, this one, this one, and this one, right, the ones that I just pointed at, right, as you can see, the ones I'm pointing at right now, those 4 hay bales are the only ones that could potentially be hiders. Unless you have an investor, of course, who's investing in a hay bale like that one, which is rare, of course. So really, those are the only 4 hay bales that you have to know that are real. Eventually, I just started branching away from that, and once I just kind of observed the difference in structure, for instance, like this, since it just kind of looks unnatural, since I've looked at this block pile so many times, it just looks unnatural, right? Or something like this, again, it looks unnatural, just by looking at it. It's a square, as you can see, so it's squared off, that's how you kind of know it's fake. In this case, also, again, squared off. As you can see, this is actually sort of a cube, but squared off, right? That's basically the idea. But the most common spots I've noticed are like if you have, again, 2 hay bales on top of the stack. This is just like what we saw for the bookshelf stack, I believe. Right, with the bookshelf stack, again, what we saw was that if we had, again, 2 bookshelves on top of the stack like this, right? It's the same exact thing for what I just showed you with the hay bale stack, right? The same exact thing. I don't think they're not identical to each other, right? This is obviously not identical to the bookshelf stack, right? But it has that same exact pattern, like a hay bale right here. 2 hay bales on top of the stack is fake. Or again, a hay bale that goes way too high up like this one. Right? That's how you would know it's fake. In fact, you see that one quite a lot, so that's really the idea of the hay bale stack. I think you could also sometimes see 2 hay bales in a row like this, so that's really the whole idea of it. Alright. So, now we have reached the ending point of the video, right? We have reached the last part we gotta go over, which is this area, right? This corner. As for this corner, before we talk about the block piles, right? There's only 3, the anvils, the bookshelves, and the flower pots. Notice how we have these tents, right? Right, we have this tent, right? And again, as you can see, there's a ladder. Hiders can hide on top of this thing, right? Just like what we saw at the far back over there, right? We saw hiders could hide on top of this tent. Well, it's the same exact thing over here. And again, it's really common to find hiders here. So again, usually flower pots, right? And also, hiders can hide further up than that, right? They can hide all the way up here as well. Now, it turns out you will sometimes also see hiders hiding on top of those leaves. Right? You might be thinking, how in the world did they get on top of that thing? Right? How do they get on top of those leaves? Well, they come from the museum sign, which I actually didn't mention at the beginning of the game. So let me actually go over that again. Many times you're going to find hiders hiding on top of the museum sign, right? You might want to launch your bow if you want, but what I've noticed is, right, when you're hunting on the museum, you're just starting out, it's always best to head into this tunnel and ignore those hiders, because there's a better chance that you're going to get more kills if you go for the ones in here. Unless, again, you're really confident that you can get the hiders on the sign while still having enough time to, of course, catch up to get those other hiders before others do. Right? And in games with ideal hunters, it makes it a little bit easier to do. Right? So again, hiders can get on top of the sign. From the sign, they can actually get on top of this entire corner right here, all the way up there. And so that's really what you have to know about, right? You gotta keep your eyes looking up there. Right, but now we're going to look at this corner, these corner block piles. We'll start with the bookshelf stack, because it's sort of the central block pile over here. Right, the most common spot is 3 bookshelves in a row like that. Right? Or if you see square bookshelves on top of the stack, or a bookshelf that goes way too high up like this. Right? Most block piles don't have a specific block that goes really high up, like this. Right? I will mention it if it does happen. As for the flower pots, notice how we do actually have a diamond of flower pots here. Right? And why am I mentioning that? Well, over here, with these flower pots, we don't actually have a diamond of flower pots, right? If you do see a diamond here, it's fake, right? Of course, there's only 3 flower pots over there. But over here, there actually is a diamond of flower pots, which is an interesting pattern, right? You just kind of see that. Now, there's a really interesting way to know if there's a fake flower pot here, and that is if there's a flower pot directly in line, right? Directly touching, directly next to another flower pot. In this case, this flower pot is directly next to this flower pot. It has to be fake. So like right here, this flower pot is directly next to this flower pot. Right here, this flower pot is directly next to this flower pot. No matter where a flower pot goes, right, it's always going to be directly next to another flower pot. I'd say the most common spot over here is actually right here, interestingly enough. Right? Now, there are some spots where that won't happen. For instance, if a flower pot's right here, it won't be directly next to another flower pot. But really, the way that you can think about it is you do in fact have a diamond of flower pots right there. But in addition to that, you have 3 other flower pots. Right? The general rule is that if you see a flower pot directly touching another flower pot, it's fake. But if that doesn't completely satisfy you, you can think of it as if you have a diamond of flower pots. Right? You do have a diamond, but then you have 3 other flower pots with it. Right? And sometimes you'll even see a flower pot hiding all the way over here, like right here, let's say. Like, it does happen. Sometimes you actually have flower or hiders like hiding on top of this thing, right? Or literally over here, right? It does happen. Right, that's basically it for the flower pots. Last thing we really got to go over for this video is the anvils, right? For instance, if you see an anvil right here, probably the most important spot to know for the anvils, right? The anvils aren't really common to find hiders in. It's usually going to be the bookshelves or the flower pots. Right, that's basically it for the anvils, right? Right? That's basically the whole idea of this video.